So I guess getting into tonight, really, where did it come from? Where does it fit? I think we know that issues around kind of diversity are very topical at the minute. This is really just by chance that this is falling at that time. This was going to be an aspect of the course anyway, and a really important aspect of the course. So, we've basically got, a really useful period of time tonight to kind of get into some real detail and to get into some real critical areas that the guys are going to share with you and going to discuss. We went through this a couple of weeks ago, just some kind of thoughts around what we wanted tonight to cover and what we wanted to kind of try and achieve in the time that we had available. And, just listening to the guys talk and, we probably started covering some of the content. It was a really emotive experience. So I guess just to really say before we start, it's kind of going to be semi-deliberate that tonight you might feel uncomfortable at times, but that's a good thing. And if that happens, then I think we should welcome that. It certainly made me think about myself and my privileges that I've been afforded growing up. And so if you feel that way, then I think we can see that as a real positive and as a real positive step forward. So I guess just in terms of the sentiment of tonight, there is an element of deliberately trying to kind of take people to some uncomfortable places, and we should be kind of, content and happy that that's going to happen. In terms of kind of the focus of the webinar, we've kind of thought about 4 broad areas that we kind of want to go after. Tonight is going to be a very kind of organic kind of session. The four speakers or the 4 guys that are making up the panel are incredibly authentic and incredibly passionate about this area, and you will see that over the course of the next hour. But we also obviously wanted to give it some kind of structure. So you've got sent these ahead of time, so they shouldn't come as a surprise. But these are the kind of the 4 broad areas that we're going to look to kind of discuss in some detail tonight. So in terms of linking to course outcomes for the level 3, these are the outcomes of the level 3 course and the level 4 course respectively. Again, shouldn't come as a surprise, but we wanted to kind of just make it clear where these mapped across to those two courses and the outcomes in particular. And we've kind of highlighted here that for the level 3, it links very much to decision-making processes within the context of which you work and practice strategies to inform decision-making. So tonight is a really critical part and a really key part in thinking about how can you make decision-making more effective. It's a common thread that's run through the level 3 course, and this is just a follow-on tonight. And for level 4, it fits across both of the core outcomes that the course is trying to go after in terms of the requirements of an effective leader of a talent ID department and a critical awareness of best practice in talent leadership within and outside of the football industry. So that's just kind of the context. That's kind of what we're looking to kind of reference against. So without further ado, kind of the first question. What I will say is please get the questions in the chat. We've got a colleague of mine, Mike Antrobus, who is manning the chat. So please do get questions in there, and he'll kind of start collating them and sharing them with me for me to ask the panel. Kind of the structure of tonight is that the guys are going to offer some of their thoughts, some of their stories, some of their experiences. But please, as they are doing so, please do pose your questions in the chat, because there will be opportunities tonight to ask those. But we're also going to collate those questions and pick them up as part of the cluster group meetings, which are going to take place for the level 3 group next week. So you will be receiving an email tomorrow from your respective cluster group tutor to arrange timings for when they're going to take place next week. Okay, so that's all the kind of background stuff out the way, and we'll get into kind of the meat of the session. So Rich, Steve, Taff and Butch, welcome all. Obviously, Rich, I think all the learners are aware of who you are, so I don't think we need to necessarily go through that in terms of an introduction. But Steve, if we come to you first, if you could just give an outline of your current role and your previous kind of background. I think most learners will be aware of that, but just to kind of refresh everybody.
Yeah, I'm currently working at Arsenal as the lead coordinator in the talent ID department. Lee Heron's the boss there. I look after 4 coordinators and oversee the pre-academy sort of recruitment. Prior to that, I was at MK Dons for 18 months. Also spent 3 years at the FA with Richard when we set up the talent ID department there, when Mike Rigg was there. Prior to that, worked in recruitment for Everton and did a part-time role at Adidas as well, and had a playing career for a few years as well.
I think a few years is understating it, but thank you, thank you, Steve. Trying to cover your age, maybe.
I am, yeah.
Taff, obviously the level 3 learners will be aware of who you are, but for the level 4 learners?
Yes, yeah, most people on level 3 will know me. So my name is Taff Rahman, currently working within the FA Talent ID department, but also delivering with the coaching side of things as well on the coaching courses. Previous to that, have worked at Arsenal and Tottenham, and in between that period, I was doing some work with Michael Johnson and Guyana in South America.
Brilliant. And you was also the first member or the first cohort on the Elite Menteeship, which is a scheme that the FA runs as well. So what was that, 3 or 4 years ago now, Taff?
Yeah, that was funny enough. Yesterday was 3 years since the graduation. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I completely forgot about that, actually.
Great. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Taff. And Butch, again, I'm aware that some learners will be aware of who you are, but if you can just, again, give a bit of a brief outline in terms of your role and backgrounds.
Yeah, no problem, Ed. It's Butch Fazal, Coach Inclusion Diversity Manager for the FA currently. Top line remit really is to look at the underrepresentation of Black and Asian coaches within the professional game, and looking to see how we can address some of those systemic and structural inequalities within the game to ensure that they have a fair crack at it, really. So that's really me.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you, guys. So we'll be hearing plenty from all 4 during the course of the evening. So I just want to kind of start really in terms of thinking about this notion of striving for diversity of thought and how we can ensure this in a talent ID department. And I'd like to come to Richard first to kind of get his experience really of working across a range of different talent ID departments, of his experiences of diversity within these departments that he's worked at, his role within that, and I think that we will hear some honest reflections tonight, and what diversity brings.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, I mean, I've been around the kind of game for a long time, and before that, I spent 20 years working in Hackney, running a youth organisation. So most of you will know or kind of have some idea that Hackney's quite what we call a challenging area. Diverse communities. It's the best sort of 20 years of my life, I suppose, working there. Really, really, really good. Many emerging communities passing through. And, when I first went there, I suppose it was I can remember National Front people giving out leaflets on the corner of Hoxton Market, and that's how it was. And we had to work very hard to change lots of things structurally and the environment. And we did that in a number of ways. And I said to the guys last week, it was a challenge every single day. And then I went into the professional game. I'm acutely aware that I sit here on this panel slightly different from everybody else. I'm a white man, so I have those advantages of being white. I have advantages of being a man. I'm privileged in that sense that I've had the opportunities to be educated and have networks that have allowed me to push on. So I always consider I was quite lucky to go from a youth organisation in Hackney to Tottenham Hotspur, one of the biggest clubs in the world, as head of recruitment. And a lot of that was the fact that, I'd had those kind of links with various different people and networks that had been created for me. And so I had those advantages to be able to get that opportunity. Of course, then I had to seize the opportunity. But I remember going from, an environment where it was, the whole issues of diversity, inclusion, challenging racism, sexism, on a daily basis, then going into a professional club like Tottenham and sitting around the table at breakfast and finding that the talk was more racist and sexist than I'd come across in 20 years, and not knowing how to challenge that, being very comfortable in my previous environment, and being really uncomfortable and actually feeling like I was letting people down because I didn't challenge, because I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be credible. and I felt that maybe this was a different world that I was going to. Now, over time, you come up with strategies to make sure that you're able to deal with that, and you do challenge and you do change, and we spent a lot of time changing the environment and how we worked, and that included the talent ID department. You know, we didn't. One of the reasons I was employed was because we weren't doing any scouting inside the North Circular because people were scared. So therefore, we did select people from the leafy suburbs, and not saying that people, you know, can't come from there. And we got some really good players, but by thinking about, you know, our department, the people that we were employing, making sure that they were representative of the communities that we wanted to go and work in. You know, Broadwater Farmers in Haringey, we weren't getting any players. They were all going to the Arsenal. So how do we make sure that we were going in there, but we didn't have the right type of scouts to go in? It wasn't for me. I remember me and John McDermott turning up to go and see Clasford Sterling, and we did look like, you know, Met Police coming along in our Vauxhall Vectra. I remember sitting there thinking, John was a bit clueless because he's from Yorkshire. And we're saying, we're in a, you know, this is not going to be easy getting across to that community centre across the road. Hope Clasford's going to look after us. You know, so we had to make some changes, and consequently that meant that, you know, the people that were coming into the club were different, and that also then brought into challenges within the club. You know, the coaching fraternity that just weren't used to dealing with different people, more challenging people from different backgrounds. So there was this kind of real change over time, and I'm not saying that we got it right, but certainly that was the start. So, you know, I certainly saw advantages, and those are things that I kind of decided to continue with. You know, we wanted to get more players from the Polish community, so it made sense to get somebody who was working in that community, who could speak the language, who was recognisable, who parents trusted. Because I was aware that, you know, kids wouldn't come into the club when I worked in Hackney because, you know, there was only white people in there. And by having some black members of staff meant that parents of black children came in there and went, I see somebody that I know, I recognise, I trust, and I feel comfortable but bringing my son into this environment, or my daughter. I've rambled on like I normally do, so I better stop there. Otherwise, that'll be the end of the evening. And we've got Brownie to go as well, and he likes to ramble as well.
I think there was a couple of things there that I just want to pick up on and speak to Brownie about. One of the things that you spoke about was opportunity, and the other thing was kind of difficulty. So I think that it's probably well acknowledged and well understood that, you know, having diversity of thought and having diversity of people, and people that are representative of their background, of the communities that they serve, is really important. But getting people to the point where they can get in those jobs is not so straightforward. And so, Brownie, I just kind of want to speak to you and you know, get you to share your thoughts and feelings with the group about this concept of opportunity, and just how difficult it is for black people to get the opportunities to even be able to get in those positions in the first place.
If I go from my own experiences, there's a lot of things I now reflect on and think. I get a lot of people say to me, "You've got a fantastic CV," and that's not because I've had a hand up or anyone's helped me. I've had to go and get myself educated and get the qualifications and the experience the real hard way, and just sort of have this real desire to push on despite all the boundaries, all the knockbacks you get. You know, I think I've had so many knockbacks, but I was determined at what I wanted to do. So I wouldn't take no for an answer. So I had to take the knocks and actually accept that there was going to be more knockbacks than there was going to be opportunities. But I think the fact is just making sure I had enough experience and qualifications that actually it was enough for someone to actually look at my CV and say, I think we should give him an interview. And if I sort of look back on that, I mean, you know, I had a fair few interviews and didn't get the gig. But, you know, for me, I think a lot of it is when I look at talent ID departments, having been an auditor as well, doing the EPP stuff, I've been in a lot of talent ID departments in a lot of areas, you know, from north, south, east and west. And I look at talent ID departments and they look very similar. But for where some of those clubs are based, the talent ID department doesn't reflect the demographic of the community. You know, I think talent ID is very much like coaching and the players, where you have to make that connection in the community. You have to go and identify that key stakeholder. talent is, everybody wants talent these days, but it's about the ones who want to go and not frightened of getting their hands dirty, and creating a department that has got all the things it needs, all the diversity it needs to go into all those communities and be effective. It's like how many in my time doing the audits, I didn't see any female scouts in any professional football club. But if you think about it from a very young age at pre-academy and 9s and 8s, mums is normally the ones who make the decisions about where their boys go. And actually, is a man the right person to have that connection with the mother? Is it a softer touch where mothers care about their boys, that a female scout can be that connection who delivers that message, who looks after that young child when he first comes into the academy? These are all the diversity sort of outputs that, as a department, to work efficiently and effectively, these are the things we should be thinking about.
Some great points. I want to come back to you later, Brownie, in terms of some of the knockbacks and you sharing some of those knockbacks and just being a bit more specific with that. But we'll move to Butch and just get your thoughts, Butch. I think you kind of went out the call for a little bit there, but I asked Brownie about opportunity and how Black people are often not afforded the opportunity, and therefore to even get into the position of getting roles, in talent ID or in professional football in general, is often because of what they've been afforded earlier in their lives and the education that they've been afforded and the networks that they've been able to create. And I just wondered if you could share some of your insights that you've kind of gained both individually, but also from the role that you have and the interactions that you have with Black coaches and Black scouts.
Yeah, Black and Asian coaches even, because I think that, if we look at two of the biggest communities, that would be the Black and Asian community, and both have had differing experiences within the game. And I think that we really need to highlight the fact that, from a talent ID perspective, currently we have a number of Black players within the academies, but then when we look at South Asians in particular, which make up 4.1% of the population, 4.1 million of the population, yet Asian scouts and Asian players are virtually invisible. So the question is, how did one community manage to break through into the game, and how did the other one? How's the other one still struggling? Will be the first question, and that would be the question that I would probably challenge all the recruiters out there currently, and also think about how can your talent ID department become as competitive and as relevant as possible. And Brownie's point around the importance of having key stakeholders, developing key relationships is critical going forward. But also probably if I look back at my own career and the opportunities that I have had, if it was a race and it was a 100-meter race, I always felt like I had to always run 110 meters, and that for me was never fair. And my dad always used to say to me, and anyone on this call, and I know some will nod when you say you're a person of color, you probably have to try twice as hard. If you then bring the intersectionality piece in it, and you're a person of color and you're female, you probably have to try 3 times as hard in an industry that is dominated by white male indigenous community. And so I think my first challenge to anyone listening to this, especially around critically thinking about what some of the key challenges are, would be to first of all look at the me before you even trying to influence the we. And if you are Indigenous white, you are privileged. Both Richard and Ed, we've had a number of conversations around what that might look like. And it's those that with that self-awareness, understanding that you do come with that privilege. It's understanding that privilege, but also understanding how you've been conditioned. And sometimes some of the decisions that you're making are so unconscious, you don't even know you're doing them. So then the next stage is, how do you then diversify a workforce which enables you to mitigate the risk of unconscious bias within your decision making, especially around talent ID, be it players, be it scouts, be it whoever you're recruiting. And I think they're the starting points for me. And if we do start with raising our own awareness of possibly the advantages that we do have, we then come to a point where we actually realize that, you know, when we're looking to recruit either players or scouts, especially from a diverse background, they're different needs, and recognizing those needs is really important. And so that was the first piece. I think the other thing is, for me, is if you have a diverse workforce, just think about the competitive advantage that you will have, regardless in such a competitive industry in particular. So if you are, for example, a Cat 3 club and you want to hold on to players, but you have an incredibly inclusive culture within the club, which enables you to celebrate the differences of players, understanding that, you know, at different points in time, be it faith, be it cultural, you actually understand those needs of those players, but also of the parents of those players that you're trying to hold on to. I think you've got more chance of holding on to those players. And in an industry that is it will take you in because you're talented, ultimately, at the end of the day, there are only a few that go through in the top end and end up with a career in the game. So that social and moral responsibility that you have to the players as well is crucial. And if you have people within your club that understand those nuances and those complexities within those communities, I think you've got a better chance, Ed.
Great, and I think just to kind of, I'm going to come to Taff in a minute, but we hear this a lot, don't we? And I don't think anybody would deny that they appoint the best person for the job, and I hear that all the time. And it is only recently that I myself have reflected on that and thought, oh, that seems a good, you know, a good enough rationale for why you would appoint somebody. You know, I don't think anybody can deny, oh, if you're the best person for the job, then how can you give it to somebody else? But you know, we don't deal with a level playing field, do we? So people don't come into the system at the same level. You know, they haven't had the same educational opportunities, the same life experiences. They haven't been afforded probably, you know, so many different things. And now I kind of look at that differently. And, you know, we talk about it from a player perspective, don't we, of playing age and the different kind of ages, and, you know, trying to compare one player with another, and one's been in the academy 5 years and one's been playing grassroots all that time. One player who's had everything and never wanted for anything versus that player who's had the opposite. And it's kind of the same when we think about opportunities that we afford scouts. You know, when we think about like who comes for interview and who the best people are, we probably have to scratch quite a lot beneath the surface and say, well, why is this the case? You know, and if we offer the right support and put the right support in place for certain individuals, how do we not know that they wouldn't flourish?
Do you want me to come back on that, Ed?
So if you could, yeah.
I was just, it's quite interesting, it, because we mentioned obviously black scouts, Asian scouts, but actually they're scouts that happen to be black or scouts that happen to be Asian. I think the most important thing is to understand that ultimately, yeah, it is a meritocracy. And you've got to see the scout first, just like when we talk about coaches, you've got to see the coach first as well. And you know, the struggles and setbacks that Steve talked about, you can look across a number of different coaches and especially recruiters that have had that same those same challenges. But what you've got to show is what Steve has shown, what Brownie has shown, which is resilience, hard work, and determination. And then ultimately, once you can show that and demonstrate that, I think all you then want is a fair opportunity, like you said, Ed. And I think that's where the experience and exposure comes in, and the opportunity to get that is really crucial. And the only way we can really find great leaders is by putting them in those situations. If we don't put people in decision-making situations, they'll never really understand how to make a key decision. And the only way we can do that, if it's dominated by possibly an indigenous white male classification, for example, we need to understand that the only way others can get that experience and exposure is by developing opportunities for them.
Yeah. Okay. Taff, I want to move on, and I want you to start this one for me, the second point. So that you may or may not know, but Taff had a illustrious career in the academy system at Arsenal. And so, Taff, I kind of think we can start with your own personal experiences here, and then we can move to Brownie, who, you know, as we know, I think from my research earlier, played 550 league games, So, so obviously Brownie will have a view on this as well. But Taff, just starting with you around, you know, underrepresentation of players and how that might feel in your club.
Just to catch up on some of the points that was already raised. When I look back at my own journey, even so, as an 8-9-year-old, I was playing football. I was enjoying my football, and I could see my friends getting signed up. And it was only after when I was about 11, 12 that they became more interest in regards to me going to a professional club or getting scouted. But little did anyone know that I was never playing in a league. I was attending Islamic classes on a Saturday, Sunday, but I was just as good as the players that were playing with me that were getting picked up at 8, 9, 10. So no one really got to see me within that environment. And it was in a school summer holiday when I actually got picked up and got picked up by Luton Town, Millwall, QPR, all asking me to come on trial. And after a small period of time, I ended up signing for Arsenal. And the reason why I'm sharing this is I suppose sometimes, not sometimes, but coming from an Asian background and not playing maybe in the mainstream, or coming from an Islamic background and going to a mosque on a Saturday, Sunday, you don't quite get to cross paths with people from within the professional game or even just mainstream football at grassroots level. So in terms of my opportunity to actually get spotted was actually a lot more smaller than someone actually playing in a grassroots system or a professional system. So in that way, it's when I look back at my journey, could my chances have been increased if scouts were more aware of the different environments and so forth. So with that said, I still get now, and in regards to Butch's point, the Black community has really stepped forward in the representations and in the different areas of the game. But in terms of the 4.1 million, the Asian community is a lot further behind. And I still get players calling and parents calling from academies asking me, well, what do we do here? How does this work? And I'm like, how comes you're calling me in terms of trying to find that information? Don't you have that support mechanism within the club? And some of them say, you know what, there is, but I don't know, I just can't seem to have that conversation, or I don't feel comfortable, or something else. And that's why I'm calling you. So it kind of gets my alarm bells ringing. Is there enough representations within clubs? And connects to the question that's here, considering underrepresentation, how players might feel. So in terms of that and getting those phone calls, are players feeling comfortable? Are parents feeling comfortable within that environment? And from the calls that I'm getting, even though I'm not affiliated with a club, it says to me that there must be some uncomfortability or some unrelatedness in order for them to reach out and seek almost a more of a comfortable conversation to someone that may be able to actually speak in a different language or break things down, speak at a time or a way that kind of suits them. So in that way, I do feel there is maybe an underrepresentation across the club in different areas, but also that leads to that uncomfortability of both for players and parents.
Great. And did you feel that way? So, you know, being that kind of at the time 11 or 12-year-old, did you feel as though you stood out? Did you feel as though you know, did that bring a level of anxiety with it? Like, did you feel that way?
Oh, 100%. I of my depths, like I didn't know where I was. I knew I enjoyed football, but this environment was completely new to me. And for me, as a 6-year-old who came over from Bangladesh, I was still developing my English and getting used to the different environments. My parents didn't know any English or a little bit of English. And to be honest, they didn't come to any of my games because one, they couldn't speak English. Two, there was an unanswered uncomfortability, almost like, well, my dad especially was like, I don't feel like I fit in there. I don't feel comfortable to go in there. And luckily I had someone who was a friend of mine who actually took me to the grassroots club in the summer holidays when Islamic school was off. And that's how I got into it. And his dad was the one that used to pick me up and take me to football and so forth. So I kind of had a significant person that come about by chance that made it a little bit more comfortable for me, not just getting to training, but just having someone that I knew that can speak for me or pick things up and find out information and bring it back to me, speak to my older brother or a family member and feed that back. So there was a lot of uncomfortability with that. And time, not me per se, but in terms of players and parents calling me predominantly from an Asian background, asking me things. So I kind of resonate and I see where they're coming from with the kind of questions they ask, the kind of comfortability they feel. So that still does exist. What I went through, but also in some clubs, some environments, some region, that seems to still be the case.
I think if we relate that back to the Talent ID level 3, and I'm sure it's been covered on a level 4 too. So the last module of the Talent ID level 3, we spent a lot of time focusing on players' backgrounds and how they got to the point that they got to, and finding out more information around, you know, parents and you know, social economic statuses and so on. And again, you know, I think all of this is just reminding me of the importance of all of that stuff, because when Taff, I guess, when you turned up day one, you know, you have this history that's behind you, which ultimately makes you feel and act in certain ways. But if we don't ask those questions and we don't find out that information, then we are naive to all of that stuff. And so, again, I think that just reinforces the importance of finding out about your players and who they are and where they're from and all of that type of information. Brownie, it was probably a different generation when you first started out. But you know, I don't know if your experiences mimicked those of Taff's. Were any different? Were any more severe?
Yeah, I think you know, I can go right up until not long before I retired that, you know, racism and all that sort of stuff was ever present. You know, I remember making my debut as a 17-year-old at Mansfield Town away, last game of the season, and it was the height of the miners' strike, and I was told to go for a warm-up. And I remember running one way, and the abuse I got was just horrific, absolutely horrific. And I just thought, wow, how am I going to cope with this? And I went back and sat down, and then 10 minutes later, the coach says, go for another run. And that time, you didn't have to go behind the lines when you could go whichever way you chose. I thought, I'll go the other way because I'm not facing that again. And I went the other way, and it was just as bad. It was horrific. And, you know, and I just thought, you've come this far, you've earned your debut or your first sort of taste of professional football. It's something you've always wanted to do. And 5 minutes later, I'll get on the pitch. And it was what I've always wanted to do. So I felt a sense of achievement. But actually, you know, professional football is a ruthless game. And however anyone can get an edge over you, they will take that. And so much so, the racist comments and all that sort of stuff, which you have to learn to discipline yourself. But football's a game that there'll be a moment where you can take your opportunity. And I spent a lifetime taking those opportunities when I felt that someone had disrespected me with racist comments and stuff like that. I remember playing against the Gillingham side when Tony Pulis was manager. And I was a bit of a hothead, and I make no secret of that. And the whole team was just racist. The whole team went through the purpose of trying to get me sent off with just an absolute barrage of racist comments for 90 minutes, which was just, it was the worst thing I think I've ever been through in professional football. And actually, no one was ever accountable for that. No support mechanism. No one's going to speak to. You spend a life just trying to just shake those things off and just trying to lead a normal life, but you know, at the end of the game, those same people want to shake your hands if they, you know, don't worry about it. It's just in the spirit of the game. That's not in the spirit of the game for me. That's not in the spirit of the game.
Did you come and accept that? Sorry, Brownie. Did you come by the point that you'd made your debut at 17? Had you just come to accept that was normality, though? Like, had your academy experiences or your centre of excellence, as it would have been at the time, was that similar? Was that the same type of experience?
It was a bit different because when we was apprentices, there was at first, this was the very first year of the youth opportunity scheme in football. The very first year it was in. So we had 4 apprentices at Northampton, and 3 out of the, and we never, there was no academy. So the 4 apprentices from day one stepped out of school and trained with the pros. It was a real fast learning curve, actually, because, you know, doing the pre-season, there was no sort of mechanism, because you were coming out of school into full-time training. Like now you have sports science, you have all that. There was none of that. You just had to do what the pros did. And that was tough. And, you know, then managers would put you in groups. And if you was at the back, you'd be getting you know, because actually there would always be forfeits on it and stuff like that. And, you know, even if you was in someone's side who, you know, the racist comments would come out from the pros and stuff like that. It was a massive learning, I say a learning curve. It was a real uncomfortable growth for me. And sometimes I remember walking home from training just in tears and stuff like that, thinking, why do they have to be like that? Why do I get treated like that? Because all I'm trying to do is get a career and get on the pitch and be a local lad who breaks through. I mean, you know, in the end, I ended up captaining the club and stuff like that. But that never went away. That racism side within football for me never really went away.
Just to add,
go on, Taff.
Sorry, just to add in terms of what Brown is talking about. So when I think back in terms of all names, Fazal, Islam, Rahman, when 9/11 happened, all of a sudden it was a matter of, oh, get the Taliban. I just wanted to play football, but my name has got an Islamic representation, and it was my fault what happened in the world. So the reason why I'm sharing this, I think sometimes things happen in the world and all of a sudden everything turns negative towards that region of people or names, or looking at this pandemic situation in some ways, connotation in terms of where it started and those people started it. So in many ways, it could even be just a moment that a global tragedy happens or something is done by someone, and all of a sudden everyone else painted with the same brush. And I remember playing through those youth team years and going into like playing semi-professional, and it was a matter of, yes, I'm trying to be strong, I'm trying to play the game, and I'm trying to intelligently just get through it. But then back of my mind, I'm protecting myself, thinking you're coming to get me for something that I had nothing to do with, but the name or my faith and so forth was implied on me. And in that way, it was, you go to the referee, you say things, you talk up. I remember running up to the referee, and the referee was just walking away because they knew they had to deal with it. And the best way to deal with it was not to deal with it. So now I'm playing the game knowing that I'm actually protecting myself from getting assaulted, and then actually the game. So in terms of that, I get where Brown is coming from in terms of, yes, you've got to be strong-willed, but there comes a time when things get on top of you, and you need that support mechanism somehow.
I think it's a great point, and you know, I think Richard said at the start about that kind of fitting in as the white privileged person wanting to fit in, new to the club, and therefore, you know, kind of almost not went along with it, but didn't probably speak up and say something at a time when you could have done. And I'm sure that we've all been in that situation at various different times in our life, whether in football or out of football. And I think, again, we all have a responsibility around, you know, what are we doing in that situation to protect our teammates, our colleagues. And I think that's, again, a question that we can really ask ourselves and be very honest about whether we're doing enough in that space. I just want to come to a question that Ahmed's asked. It's a fantastic question. And we talk, and I'd like to come to you on this, Rich. So we talk a lot about so I'll read it as Ahmed said, because he's said a really nice thing here. So as a BAMI scout, how can you progress from someone who's not just seen as someone who's great at connecting with communities and finding inner city players to a position of trust, i.e. you're able to get a role higher up at board level and not be pigeonholed to be that person who's great at finding the inner city players?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I don't want anybody to think one that's all I would have thought about. It's just purely a business decision. I get that, to get an advantage is really important. There is a moral argument. I remember speaking to Butch about the kind of moral, legal, business arguments that you can make, and they're all legitimate. What I would say is that one of the concerns that I've always had is how, this whole thing about giving people opportunity and then people failing because they don't have the right experience or qualification or knowledge. One of the things within Talent ID was always, when the original courses, there was an original Scouts course that you had to work in the club to go on the course. And so therefore it just meant that lots of people weren't able to get in at all. So it was, well, you're in the club, and that meant probably you were like me, you were white, you're a male, and then you went on the course. And if you're outside it, there wasn't anything. Then we introduced these various different levels, and people used to say to me, well, there's a ceiling, isn't there? How do we go from one to the other? So one of the reasons we introduced level 2 regional courses was to give people that aspire to become Scouts the opportunity of getting the qualification. So that wasn't a barrier. So I think that's the key now, and to make sure that the education programs are open and allowing other people to come onto, so that you don't reach a ceiling where you suddenly can't get onto the level 3 or you can't get onto the level 4, which then means you can't get to the level 5. And I'm not saying the level 5 then gives you access into that level, but it does change the perception of people that you're now going into kind of leadership roles, taking on more responsibility, and then there is an opportunity for you then to go through, like I have, onto a level 5 and then get jobs at a different level within an organisation. At the moment, I don't think people have that opportunity because they're restricted on the levels that they can work at. And it's not just the qualification. We'll all know that by going on courses. When I went on my A licence, I met people that gave me opportunities. I created relationships with people. When I'm on the level 4, I'm still creating relationships, or the level 5. The people that have been through the courses means that my little book of contacts is great. And, my current job, they love me because I can pick the phone up and say to Nicky Hammond, do you want to come down with Celtic and train at Loughborough next week for your pre-season? So I've got those. So all of those things I think are important in terms of then being seen as something a little bit different. And I know that we've all gone through it, whether, I got employed at Tottenham because I worked in Hackney and I knew London, and I was associated with the local community, and Tottenham wanted to get into the community because Arsenal was stealing all the kids and we need to do better. It's then when you get in, how you then, I suppose, are given the opportunity to develop, to build that trust in you, to then think that you can get these other opportunities. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that's kind of, what I'm kind of thinking.
Ed?
No, and I think that, yes, go on.
Just thinking about what Richard said and Taff there. So I remember the experience I had when I was at Wickham, and John Gorman, who was the manager at the time, lost his wife, and he went off on compassionate leave. And we'd gone 23 games at the start of the season unbeaten. And then second half season we sort of dropped off. But we lost a young lad, Mark Filer, in a car crash. 2 weeks later, John Gorman's wife died. So he went off on compassionate leave. We'd slipped out of the playoff places. So I remember the managing director saying to me, we've got 8 games to go. You need to try and get us up or get us into a playoff spot. So we won something like 6. I was put in charge. We won 6 games, drew 1, and we lost 1. So we ended up getting into the playoffs, didn't get through, lost a 2-legged semi-final against Cheltenham. And so many people said to me, you've got a great chance of being a manager. A great chance. You've got all the skills to be a manager. But I knew in my heart of hearts that the reality of me applying for a manager's job and getting a manager's interview and getting the reality for my life of how I'd grown up and come through football to get to that point, I knew the chance of me getting a manager's job or getting an interview for the manager was so slim, I was not going to put myself on that road. And that's why I thought, well, how could I still impact the game at some point where in a role of leadership? And as Richard sort of said, so I did the level 5 at St George's Park when I was there working in the talent ID department with Richard, and the sort of people I've rubbed shoulders with and created contacts with, I feel I have more chance of becoming a technical director somewhere than I did of becoming a football manager. and the statistics don't lie.
And again, you know, you're not going to be the only one in that boat. And so again, because people of colour feel like that, they probably become very despondent and therefore don't even put themselves out there. And listen, you know, I can't, you know, say with any credibility that that's how people do feel, but it would seem that seems a logical argument and a logical thing to say. I just wanted to come to another question, and this is for you, Butch, and Paul, thank you for asking this. So Paul asks, have the FA considered a scheme to sponsor BAMI scouts like they do with BAMI coaches? And again, I'm sure people will have seen this week a partnership between the PFA, the Premier League and the EFL around bursary schemes for BAMI coaches. My colleague Mike has actually messaged me to say, could we also put that onto the clubs as well to consider? So that might be something that people can be reflecting on. But Butch, what's your take from an FA perspective here?
I think like any project such as the BAME player to coach scheme that they've just recently announced, they're positive action interventions because it's clear that there's a significant underrepresentation. Ultimately, you know, Brownie's sort of reflections on his life is a lived experience, and when you then pull together a number of people who've had the same challenges, the question you've got to ask yourself is why are we still living through that? And so first of all, we need to recognize that there are clear lack of opportunities for scouts or even for coaches within the game. So my role, I suppose, is to look at those gaps and fill those gaps with an intervention which will effectively try and redress that balance. And so the question around, yes, we could have a project like that, and we could be front and center of it because we have scouts that go out and look at England players as well. So and Richard and Brownie will know more about that than I would. How well did we do in that area? Again, there's two people that can probably answer that better than I can because they're front and center of it. But I think what you are finding clearly is that dependent on what you're recruiting in particular and what the type of player that you're after, I think that will ultimately decide where you're going to look for those players. I think the one thing that I would challenge scouts and recruiters is to ask them that what does the change in demographic look like? What does this change in world look like? In particular, when you think that, you know, if you know that your business model is to develop players from the club and get them into the first team and make them club legends, then you've got to look in and around that locality. And if you're always going to the same well all the time, at some point in time, that water will run dry. And then you're going to ask yourself, where is the rest of the talent? And so that piece on the talent on the level 2 around looking at your demographics is crucial, and doing an audit of what your demographics in your in and around your club looks like. And I think when you get to the point where you're actually recruiting the scouts in particular, you've got to ask yourself, what kind of skills and competencies do they require to ensure that you're getting those players through the door, and the demographic is also representative of the area that you represent. Because what will happen, and what the kickback for that will be, you have a local Asian lad in a predominantly Asian area. I promise you, okay, you might have 7,000 on your gate. You get a local lad in, and you know it's a predominantly Asian area, you'll have a lot more coming through the door because they see a role model there that they think that they can emulate, but also they can support. So there's a number of advantages to having a diverse playing workforce, and also having a diverse scouting workforce. And I would ask those who are critically thinking about this issue to also be research led. So McKinsey study in inequality in diversity makes a difference. Some of the stuff that he found in particular were that teams that had 15% more teams that were more gender diverse increased productivity by 15%, and teams that were ethnically more diverse within their workforce increased productivity by 35%. So there's a lot of stats out there that will tell you that the more diverse the workforce is, with a change in demographic, which in 2021 would suggest that 20% of the country will be BAME, Black, Asian or minority ethnic, that's 1 in 5. That's something that clubs need to be looking at, not just through the eyes of players, but also through the eyes of the supporters that they're going to be bringing in as well. So there's a number of different arguments around what that should look like and how that should be represented. And I think it's important that we, when we become those recruiters, we've got to ask ourselves some key questions. First of all, what is our vision? And then, as a leader, head of recruitment, you should have a vision on what the club is going, what the club's business model looks like. And then what you've got to do is you've got to make sure as a leader that you have followers, and the followers will only follow your vision if they believe in it. And morally, it's what you go for, but also you develop an environment in which you live and breathe that vision as well. So I think, you know, when you get to level 3 and level 4 in talent ID, and we're asking them to be the leaders of tomorrow, my challenge would be those leaders of tomorrow have also got to see what's coming over the hill. And if you're seeing a demographic landscape that's changing, and with the impact of COVID-19 in particular, we're also realizing that a lot of clubs are hemorrhaging their players right now, and some are not even going to have academies. So where does that talent go? And as well as where that talent goes looking forward, some clubs are just reducing their squads. So where's that talent going? So we've got to, as leaders in particular, my challenge to those out there listening to this is that, you know, do you have a vision going forward? Do you know what's coming over the hill? Have you done that audit? Because if you haven't, don't be surprised that, you know, you're not getting the talent coming through the door. That's absolutely not answered the question, Ed. I apologize, but it is something that I just like to make the point of, because I think it's important that we start thinking like that. And that diversity piece can't just be, and I've said it on a million times, okay, it can't just be that transactional piece. We want to bring scouts into the club. We want to bring heads of recruitment into the club, right? They have a vision that can transform the environments that they're working. So I want them to be transformational in looking at some of the issues that Taff has struggled with, some of the issues that Brownie has struggled with as a player. And you want to create an environment within the club that will include everyone that's in the club. They have a sense of value and they have a sense of purpose, and they also feel psychologically safe. Because if we're truly going to unpick racism, the systemic racism that's within the game and the structural inequalities that are endemic within the game, we need to have a culture shift. And the people who are going to have that culture shift are the leaders, and the leaders are on this call, who are level 3 and level 4 and level 5. Yeah, and that's really important.
And I think so. I guess pushing that onto the people on the call, on the courses is, you know, what positive intervention can you implement and design within your club that addresses some of the things that Butch has just spoken about. So I think that's a challenge back over to you, and something for you guys to think about and discuss further, which we can do. Just conscious of moving on, guys, and looking at kind of, and I think we've naturally kind of started talking about this stuff anyway, as we kind of we're going to, given the organic nature of the conversation. But I guess this is a really kind of reflective question around challenging stereotypes and challenging ourselves. And I think that, you know, Ahmed's question is a perfect example of where we can stereotype scouts, and we look at certain scouts and think that, oh, they're appropriate for this, but then we pigeonhole them and maybe we don't see their potential above and beyond that. And we certainly do that with players as well. And again, Taff, just coming back to you, I know that you had some experiences as a player in terms of you were maybe not so much pigeonholed, but certainly a stereotyped as a certain player, and you played in a certain position, and again, you know, that therefore kind of probably limited some of the opportunities that you had moving forward. And again, things like, at what point were you consulted about that? At what point were you given some level of empowerment and ownership to have those conversations with people? So I'd be interested for you to share that with the group.
Yeah, so I was always always pretty much put out to play wide in regards to just being quick and being able to run a high intensity and so forth. And it wasn't anything other than just doing the physical workload as such. So in that way, it didn't help the development of my game. It didn't help the development of me having to work out situations or scenarios or really work in more relationship with the players. It was almost like more in isolation. So in that way, it was disempowering on the way you feel. So with that didn't help my confidence. That didn't help my motives to move forward, but also develop as a player. So in regards to that whole stereotypical look at players and being of a certain shape or a certain attribute that pigeonholes you into a certain position, it very much transfers into what Ahmed was referring to in some ways. And hopefully we don't do that. We don't see that someone who's able to connect with communities, maybe in hard to reach areas, is that's all they're good for. I think one of the points that Butch made about having representation in relation to the demographic of your area, I think that's great. But I think also having someone, you might have someone of a completely different background that might not match up to the demographic of your area, but that's also a very much, from my point of view, a unique selling point. Who knows, you might get players from a high density Black Asian community that goes to an area where there isn't maybe a high demographic of Black Asian ethnic minorities, but you have a scout or you have a coach or you have a female scout that someone can relate to. I think that is a big currency for a club. So in that way, it's got to be open-minded about. We're not also saying, oh, demographically that's your area, you should have a makeup of those scouts. I think you can have it right the way across the board, and give that diversity of thought to everyone from a different angle.
Yeah, great point. Rich, I just want to come to you on this. And again, with your experiences of working in a variety of different talent ID departments, did you notice a shift, or could you speak about anything that you felt you did really well, or things that you would do differently about kind of, you know, challenging any stereotypes, whether that's from a playing perspective or a staff perspective?
I mean, I think certainly by changing the environment, by changing the people, you know, you have a responsibility. I'm in a position of power, so I can make decisions about who I employ. Certainly, you know, a feel of a place is much changed when you have a diverse workforce. There's no question about it. It changes if you bring more women into the workforce, as much as when if you bring other people from other ethnic backgrounds. You know, there's a whole thing. Whether that person's gay or straight, I mean, there's a whole range of things that affect the dynamics within an organisation, and I think, you know, is that selling point that Taff mentioned. I think that's really, really important. I do think there is a responsibility for us. I think one of the issues in football generally is that we've become this kind of very specialist kind of game where I remember doing EPPP and somebody questioning one of the coaches and saying, well, what do you do for the warm-up? And he said, oh, I don't know. I've got a specialist warm-up coach that does that. You know, back in the day, he would have done everything. And I think that's a little bit like, I'm not saying that I don't have a responsibility to educate myself. I remember having a really difficult conversation with a woman in Finland who was a Muslim woman who was really concerned about her son coming to England and wanted to know what she was going to do, or he was going to do during Ramadan. You know, how are we going to? I didn't know. I said, look, I don't know. I think it's fine. You know, we have Muslim players playing. I need to go find from our S&C coach at the club and say, you know, I had a big panic up, and he said it's fine. You know, it's no problem. We have a number of Muslim players in the club, and we know how to deal with that. And I'm more than happy to speak to her, and I can reassure her about some of the things we're doing. But my ignorance was out there for all to see. So I think we have a responsibility to make sure that we're continually developing ourselves as white men, to ensure that we understand the people that we're working with and understand our responsibility to make sure that the workforce is representative of the community, but also there's that diverse thinking within the group that helps challenge those stereotypes.
Yeah.
And I've had conversations with people on the course who have said, you know, it's ridiculous that we think all black people are quick. You know, I know that from friends who are slower than I am, and I'm slow. And, you know, just saying, and the commentators say it, and the coach says it, and the scouts say, oh, yeah, he's quick. And they just say it as a kind of a throwaway in the report. You know, he's this player, he's quick, he's strong, he's powerful. And it's just a massive stereotype, you know. And so how do we make sure that we're challenging that?
And that is a key part of critical thinking, isn't it? Because all we do is reinforce tradition, we reinforce cultural norms, and then they become accepted as truth and as facts, and they just get perpetuated time and time and time again, and so they just get more reinforced and they become more deep rooted. So I think that again is a point for people to think about when they're using terminology and they're using certain language to describe players. You know, to what extent are we constantly challenging and critiquing our thinking? I also want to pick up there, Rich, on something you said about kind of ignorance. And I must admit, I felt the same way in terms of as a white male engaging in conversation. And I must admit, you know, I've worked with Butch now for 3 years, and you know, I feel that over that time we've worked more and more closely, and we've had more and more conversations. But at the start of our relationship, I would say that I was quite anxious and nervous as a white male, and being aware that I was a white male, of kind of even just language and terminology of what to use and what to say. And I'm sure that I'm not the only one that's in that boat. So, you know, I'm sure that people have been on workshops before where, you know, what language can you use and not use? And you can become almost scared of it to the point that you end up avoiding the situation altogether. So I guess, you know, anybody can pick up on this point, but, you know, what do you recommend here? You know, how can people start to engage and initiate conversations and not feel scared of saying the wrong thing through condemnation of sounding racist when it wasn't their intention, but they're just ignorant, and it's nothing more than that. And they're ignorant because they've never put themselves, or they've never been in situations like that before.
I remember being told a long time ago, there's this continuum of kind of, you know, absolute ignorance at one end and kind of enlightenment at the other, and you sit somewhere along that continuum, and you're not. I can't be perfect. My upbringing, my, you know, history, everything about me would mean that I'm somewhere along that. I'm not going to be, you know, I know I'm not down the one end. Am I right at the top? Well, I don't think so. I still think I have to challenge myself. And I remember somebody saying to me, you can't stop having the discussion because you're a bit worried about the language. You might get it wrong. It's, you know, it's for me, for example, I don't really understand things around transgender. Does that mean I just don't talk about transgender because I'm uncomfortable about it, so I forget and don't talk about it? Because I don't understand the language or the right words to use or how you describe it. And I know it. And I knew it from my mum. She didn't, when I talked about black people, she got really embarrassed and said, no, they're not black, they're brown. And I said, no, mum, they're not. They're, you know, and she couldn't have the discussion because she was brought up in a time where she felt that the word black was wrong to be used at that point in time. But you can't, from my point of view, and, you know, it's from my point of view, you can't be frightened of having the discussion because you're not quite sure. Now you have a responsibility to educate yourself and get it right, but that sometimes by making a mistake every now and then, in the best intentions. Of course, you're not using it in a derogatory term, but you're having to educate yourself through some kind of, you know, kind of reflection and education from others.
Ed, can I just pick up on that point as well?
Yeah, please.
So I use a sentence all the time currently, okay, which I hope will resonate with a number of people out there, which is, don't let your fear paralyze your curiosity. Just don't let your fear paralyze your curiosity. If you're not sure, you have to develop an environment where you can ask, and then people will share. And the one thing that you've got to understand, okay, is sweeping statements and challenging stereotypes in particular. What you've got to understand is that every person of color will have a nuanced experience to share with you. And yeah, there will be a number of patterns and trends that might come through. But ultimately, my experience as a South Asian compared to Taff's experience as a South Asian, compared to Brownie's experience as a black person, are all nuanced. And what you've got to understand, okay, is that if you can develop initially, okay, I've always said it, diversity and inclusion is about relationships and building good relationships. And then, just like you and I, Ed, when we first met, and when I met Richard for the first time as well, it was a case of just initially just having those conversations, and then organically through building a relationship, some trust, some rapport, then your curiosity, you pick up the phone, you say, Butch, I want to pick your brain on this. And it's that curiosity. So, that sentence, if we can just remember that, then I think that we won't go too far wrong. But you've got to be brave enough to have those courageous conversations sometimes as well.
Great.
Can I just come?
Yes, please, Brownie. Yes, please do.
Just on that, though, I mean, we're talking about the individual here. And I think the thing about it is what we need to understand is we work within a framework in a football club, which is just, there's rules and everything everywhere. So people step out of line, there's a consequence. So if we think about it from a systemic perspective, we talk about, the white people getting educated, and where do they go to get that education? So we can ask some good questions, but there's no real answers. So we have to look at the framework that we work within. So if we talk about a racist incident gets reported to the FA, right? So who deals with that? Who decides? Who creates that understanding of the seriousness of that? If 12 white blokes sit in a room deciding the outcome of somebody's who's committing a racist act is clear, how do they ever get the learning and understanding of how big that race incident is to that person who feels that they've been wronged against? So if we're going to get to a place where people can go for education, when these things happen, we have to have a system where the people who deliver the consequence or make the rules up, there's the right people in the room discussing the consequence. And I talk about people of colour, different backgrounds, diverse, however you want to put it, but make sure that cohort of people who are the decision makers as to what the consequence is all have that skill set, that the right sort of level of conversation and rules can be put in place for what the consequence is. And that's where the education starts. Because actually, we can't just sit here and say, and Richard talks about, he wants to learn and learn more about it and understand it. But if the system isn't built in a way that allows people to get the education around the rules, the education ain't ever going to come. I think we need to think bigger than that.
Sorry, Brownie. And I think added to that, it's about providing platforms for people to share their personal experiences and insights, their stories, because it's only through that mechanism that you can get that genuine sense of authenticity and feelings from people that you just otherwise wouldn't get. And I think that's probably something that's lacking. And just before we move on to the final slide, I would again like to challenge the group and ask them about opportunities that they provide in their football clubs where Black and Asian, groups are given platforms to talk, are given platforms to kind of be centre stage and share their experiences and to be able to share their stories. And again, one outcome from this might be that starts to happen more regularly if it doesn't already. But again, we can pick that up in the cluster groups next week or think a little bit further. Just conscious again of time. It is flying, which is always a good sign that we're engaged in some real deep and meaningful conversation. I think this is the final one really around a recognition of how the talent ID landscape has changed and what future trends might look like. I think we've focused quite a lot on how it has been, and I think we've started to move towards how it might look moving forward. And Butch started to give some kind of figures around kind of what the population, the general population is going to look like in 5-10 years time. And so what are the consequences of that in terms of future trends? So again, Brownie, I would like you to kind of just give some brief reflections on kind of where things have been, but more so from a point of view of how have you seen it change over the last few years, and probably from the point where you joined the FA and were able to interact and see things. Do you think that there has been a shift?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there'd definitely be a shift. I mean, when me and Richard started at the FA, there was no qualifications for scouts. There was nowhere for them to go and get educated and start building that sort of pathway. Richard sort of took that by the horns, and with other people at the FA, developed the level 1 to 5 as to where we are now. And the great thing about it is like today, I had a text message from a scout who works in one of our community scouts saying coaches wanting to get into coaching, and I just signposted him straight away to the FA level 1. That's the place to go and start. So 5 years ago that wasn't there. But what we've also got now around the talent ID landscape, and this pandemic's sort of created it really, because actually around the government guidelines, none of the professional clubs can go back and can do anything. But what I've noticed is a lot of the grassroots people are taking initiatives. There's a lot of individual coaching. There's a lot of things going on around lots of parks all over the place, that actually getting out and looking at those younger players in small groups working with coaches, there's a lot more individual coaching going on and stuff like that. So how that talent is going to sort of start to appear on the landscape in the next couple of years, I'm not entirely sure, because there's a lot more private academies. There's a lot more people doing these things, that a lot of players are going to start coming out of those areas more so than that come into the game at a higher level than grassroots. It's like we're building this intermediate bit between grassroots and the academies. It's like there's another level now because of all this sort of private coaching going on and people running these little private academies. So for me, I think the pool's going to get bigger, but where we go to find that talent is going to become even more strategic as to how we find it, as well as the community stuff. I looked at stuff. I did some research, and it's like I worked out that on a Saturday morning or a Saturday, there's over 6,000 boys between the age of 9 and I think it's 14 playing football in London, and that's a lot. That's a lot. And when I think about that in one, that's just in one league, and how many different leagues there are in London. It's just, there's loads, and I just think to myself, how big is that talent pool? That's a huge talent pool. And how do we cover it? And how many people are, because we all still miss players. So what do we need to do to get into some of these places and actually understand the landscape? And I think the more, as Butch used those statistics, the more diverse your recruitment department is, the better chance you've got of being more successful.
I think just on that as well, to add on, and like what Brown has just talked about, I have a saying that I keep on repeating again and again. Don't always corridor compete, but capture what's emerging and shape its future. And what Brown is just talking about in terms of that in between bracket of players playing in small groups or playing in some sort of development center that's not affiliated to a club in terms of an academy or a grassroots system. If you just get into that corridor competition where you're going to the same places, at the end you're going to miss out what's emerging. And a lot like the business world doesn't always go keep on competing for the same shop corner. It's more so looking at, okay, what area is emerging, what other demographic, what other region, what other timetable, what other community, what's emerging, and how do we go and shape that future? How do we go and capture that and ultimately really put some interventions into capture those players? So got to be really creative within that kind of thinking. So you're not going down that corridor competition where everyone's going down the same path.
Yeah, no, definitely. Butch, Rich, have you got anything final to add just before we kind of bring things to a conclusion tonight? I mean, I've got one thing that kind of really I want to kind of say, which I think summarizes things, and that's around, if I think of myself personally and my personal development and professional development over the last 5 years, I feel that within that time I've created a far more diverse network. And for that, I am so much a better person and so much a better professional because of it. And I recognize and reflect on that every day. And so again, if everybody on this call can also think about that in the same way and think just how diverse is my network, because I can promise you, the more diverse it is, the more experiences you're able to tap into, the different backgrounds that people come from and the experiences that they've had will make you a more empathetic and more well-rounded and a more informed individual.
That's powerful, Ed. I think from my perspective, my challenge is as a person of color, if you are going into a club, for example, okay, my wife will not laugh now because I say it all the time, but you've always got to be the best version of yourself. And I think the other thing that I would challenge people to do if they are going into those clubs is to challenge those stereotypes they might have of those communities. So really get an understanding of the systemic issues, the structural inequalities, and then become an agent for change within those clubs. So be that role model that people will look at you and go, actually, you know what, I got that guy wrong, or I got that lady wrong. And I think that when you become an agent for change within the club, you're slightly shifting the dial and moving the culture. And then ultimately, the real challenge is once you've become an agent for change, can you truly be a catalyst for change? Because I certainly do not want Steve, Brownie or Taff or anyone else in 5 years' time going through those experiences again.
Great. And I think that's another point in terms of we don't want to be here in 5 years' time talking about the same things again. And so, again, that can only happen if the people who are on this call in particular, you know, take upon that mantra of kind of agents for change and then catalysts for change. So yeah, great point. Thanks, Butch. Rich, anything final from you to add?
No, I don't think so. I think it's appropriate. So I think Butch's final words are probably the most important one. So yeah, I don't have anything to add. I think it's been a really interesting discussion, and I think I just hope that in reflection from the guys on the 3 and the 4 that they think very deeply about, you know, what their part in this can be.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much. Taff, Steve, any final thoughts from you guys? Are you happy with?
2 things for me. I'll say one of them being creating opportunities. So similar to like what we've spoken about for Black, Asian, ethnic minorities, it's almost like going into scouting or going into coaching. It's almost like a private school. And if they're not getting the opportunities to cross paths with people, they're not getting that way in. So, and clubs be more open to creating opportunities so ultimately they get to cross paths and learn and develop. Because it seems like the opportunities are pretty much going to the same people over and over again because you're in that network. So being open to that, I suppose leaving it on a question for everyone to ponder on. If you couldn't fail, what would you change positively for diversity? So if you couldn't fail, what would you go and positively change for diversity? Maybe in your club, maybe at your organization, wherever it is. And if you can't fail, go for it. Go see what and really challenge that status quo.
Great question. Thanks, Taff. Brownie, anything final from you?
Just from me, I'll just say, you know, with what's been discussed tonight, just be comfortable just be comfortable being vulnerable, because actually that's what's going to create your curiosity and make you want to go out there and create change. So, you know, if you're going to sit in your comfort zone, you ain't going to get any change. But what I will say is just be comfortable being vulnerable, and don't be frightened of having those conversations with any of your family sort of coaches, or just go and speak to them and get more understanding of what it is we've spoken about tonight, so you're more confident in those situations.
Great. Guys, thank you to the Butch, to Taff, to Steve, and to Richard. I hope that you've all found this an engaging and a deeply reflective session tonight. I know that, again, you know, I certainly have, speaking to these guys, you know, it gets me thinking all the time about what can I do more. And, you know, we are all in this together. This isn't pointing fingers at anybody. This is about a collective effort to move things forward in a positive fashion. I think a lot's been said. So this has been recorded. So please do review and recap. For the level 3 group, we will be picking this up in the cluster group sessions next week. This is the task, but please don't worry about reading this now. This will get sent out first thing tomorrow morning. So as I say, don't be scrambling this down now. Enjoy the rest of your evenings, everybody. Thanks again for your attendance, and hopefully you'll come next week in the cluster groups with lots of different questions. I will share all of the contact details so that you've got them. So if you want to pick up with anybody in particular based on anything that's been said tonight, then I know that all the members of the panel will be happy to answer those questions. But once again, thank you to the panel and thanks everybody, and enjoy your evenings.
Thank you.